You just met with the JPMorgan CFO, Marianne Lake, last week. We had the analyst day coming up on Tuesday. You called JPMorgan the LeBron James of banking. What does that mean? Is it basketball?
Yes, it's basketball.
Okay. I'm not a basketball guy. Come on, help me out.
You just set yourself up for so much abuse from about 99% of the audience.
So true. Help me.
LeBron James is one of the best basketball players. He'll probably get into the Hall of Fame, and he's great because he's good not just on offense, but also on defense. And to push the analogy, JPMorgan has been spectacular on defense through the financial crisis, but they've also been good on offense, gaining market share in almost all of their major business lines. So that's why we call JPMorgan the LeBron James of banking. Yeah.
Okay, so if we have the 34% rise since the election and the defense angle, what's the offense going to look like in 2017? How do they play that?
Well, higher interest rates are good. You have the conversation on your show earlier about when does the Fed raise rates, whether it's March or May. Who cares? Higher rates are very good for JPMorgan, the banking industry generally. In addition, capital markets, you see a little bit more of a risk-on attitude. So half of JPMorgan is traditional lending, and that gets a boost from rates. The other half is capital markets. That gets a boost by risk-on. So our theme for JPMorgan is turn on the offense. Their revenues have been flat the entire decade. Now we think they're poised to take off. And to a degree, JPMorgan is a microcosm of the banking industry because the banking industry as a whole has shown the worst revenue growth in 8 decades, but now we see revenue growth accelerating.
And Mike, a couple of things and a couple of reasons why we like you. There's some thorough research, and then he's the ultimate salesperson, isn't he? Yes. He comes onto the set and he brings this little pig. What is this about?
Well, I'm a bank analyst. I bring my bank.
Okay.
But the point is that banks and JPMorgan have been very inward-looking, dealing with regulations for this decade.
So we have some visual analogy?
We do have a visual analogy.
Tape,
I brought the red tape.
Red tape.
Yeah.
The red tape. This is what's taken place with banks so far.
Lift it up a little bit.
Decade.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Okay, so we have red tape.
Yeah.
And then we have more red tape.
Okay. And you're matching today as well.
There you go. So we have more red tape and red tape and red tape and red tape. And so what I would say is no more red tape. And I don't think we'll have more red tape. Too much red tape in the banking industry. And so what that causes is less focus on customers and too much focus on your internal systems. It's too complicated. So my suggestion to regulators is don't sacrifice one iota of safety and stability. Having said that, eliminate as much red tape as possible. Too much red tape at banks, and that will allow banks to turn on the offense, not just JPMorgan, but for the industry as a whole.
I'm just wondering how necessary this actually was. I'm starting to think it wasn't necessary at all. And I don't know why I've got to be the one holding it, so you're going to have that back, Mike Mayo. The question I want to ask about some of these banks is we often delve right into a conversation about Wall Street, about investment banks, but it's the commercial arm, the retail arm to be more specific, that a lot of these CEOs want to spend time talking about. Back in the UK, you go into a bank branch now, you won't be met by an individual, you'll be met by a machine. Here in the United States, I don't see much of that happening. How quickly is that going to happen?
Well, that's one reason we're so excited and bullish on the banks. It's not just the top line, it's the bottom line through better expense control. U.S. banks have 87,000 branches. If U.S. banks had the same level of branches as they had in the 1950s per person, you'd be around 52,000 branches. That's too many branches. But now banks are getting traction with mobile banking. So Bank America has a level of transactions through mobile devices equal to over 800 branches. So as customers have greater acceptance of the mobile banking channel, that allows banks to close more branches. You've seen more announcements. You're going to see more. You'll probably see a reduction of 10,000 branches, over the next several years. So the days of brick and mortar are giving way to more clicks.
So let's talk about Bank of America, exactly, and contrast it with JPMorgan for a moment, because let's go back to LeBron James and basketball, yes, Alex, but switching from defense to offense, that's not an easy switch to make. A CEO who's very, very good at defense and has had to be, given that regulation, that red tape on your pink pig there, has had to be really good on defense. Is a Bank of America positioned as well to switch to offense now that the world is different?
Well, the returns at JPMorgan are leading among the global banks. So JPMorgan has a 13% ROE, whereas Bank of America has a 9% ROE. So that's a huge difference. JPMorgan's got the job done. Bank of America is not there yet. We think Bank of America gets there in the next year, 2 years. Bank of America has led the way, though, in reducing the number of branches. So Bank of America had 6,000 branches, and they're down to around 4,500. By the way, contrast that with Wells Fargo, which still has 6,000 branches, and they'll have to catch up. So they've done a good job at retooling the retail distribution. And so that's something to look forward to with Bank of America, and that will help propel. But your question's on revenue growth. Bank of America guided for 6% higher spread revenues between the fourth and the first quarter. So if you want to talk about interest rates and the benefit to banks, look at Bank of America, look at their upcoming first quarter results based on what they've already guided. So if you get a rate hike, again, March, May, that's gravy for the revenue growth for Bank of America.
That doesn't require a lot of offensive play, actually. That's just coming in. That's just the rates going up and you're making more money. The question is, can a Bank of America, should a Bank of America switch to more of a risk-on strategy where they've really been defensive, taking risk off, as they've had to do for quite a years? Can they make that transition?
You're right. I mean, don't confuse brains with the bull market. And it's a better environment that's going to help the results of Bank of America and the banking industry as a whole. Bank of America has not gained market share the same way as done by JPMorgan. So we are not suggesting banks take much more risk on. Okay? Slow and steady wins the race for banks. So you have the red tape. Okay? No more red tape. But just by having no more added on, it allows Bank of America and the other banks to focus more on their customers. They should get better growth as a result. And whether it's Bank of America or JPMorgan, they are gaining share in capital markets from the European banks. I know you've talked a lot about Barclays today, but take all the European banks, take the big U.S. banks. U.S. banks are gaining share. And one reason is U.S. banks have the strongest balance sheets in a generation, and they're able to leverage those balance sheets now.
Not to belabor a dead pig here, but can you help us quantify if we don't get any more higher capital raises from banks, and if we do get regulatory costs coming down, what's the basis point follow through from that to return on tangible common equity?
So our theme is that U.S. banks for the last decade have destroyed value. U.S. banks are going from value destruction to value creation. U.S. banks have had single-digit ROEs, and now they're on the cusp, they're on the doorstep of showing double-digit ROEs. And so even without the benefit of a Trump bump, even without the benefit of much higher rates, even without the benefit of lower taxes, we have U.S. banks going from 9% to 11% ROEs. And that by itself gets banks to value creation, even before adjusting for the strongest balance sheets in a generation.
I wonder how many people out there, Mike, are worried that we've hit a top because he's so bullish and he started bringing props.
Is that the sign?
Right, exactly.
Is that the indicator?
Looking very sharp.
Jumping the shark to mix animals here.
Yeah, maybe.